Hello, everyone. John Galloway here with Toprock Real Estate. Back at you again with another video, just here to help you out. Today, I got the suit jacket on, and we are talking about agency relationships. So, if you are a buyer, if you are a seller, there are several contracts that you really need to know about in Colorado. They're the contracts that um, we first sign whenever we're going to engage a new client. There are two documents that we're going to cover today. One, which is a disclosure document and is up right now, which is our definitions of working relationship. This is just a document that helps you as a member of the public understand the ways that we as real estate brokers can work with you. So it's not a contract, it's just a disclosure, but it is helpful to understand what we define a seller's agent as, a buyer's agent, and a transaction broker, because you may not be familiar with it. And then the other document that we're also going to review today is the exclusive right to sell listing contract. This is the contract document when you're a seller that helps us define the relationship, how we will operate with you, how we will sell. Um, and that's that. So let's get into it. First of all, if you like the content, if you enjoy the videos, please do your best to like, subscribe, and share the channel. It really helps motivate me. I love seeing you all like, subscribe, and engage, comment. It's also just helpful for me to know that people are out there and they care. In addition, text me, y'all. 720-515-9721. That is goes straight to my cell phone. I love getting texts in the middle of the day, in the middle of the night, saying, "Hey, John, I saw your video, and I'd really like to talk to you about real estate." So reach out. Even if you don't have anything to buy or sell right now, if you're not looking to get into the market, if you just want to spend some time talking to me about real estate, I do that all the time. It's an altruistic mindset. If you need help, if you have questions, I'd much rather you talk to somebody that you can trust rather than just sitting around wondering what might be in terms of real estate. So call me, text me. You're not going to bother me. It could be 2 o'clock in the morning. I might be asleep. I may call you back in the morning, but if I'm up and I got my phone on me, I'll for sure get back to you as soon as I can. So, okay, let's get into this. All right. The first document that we're going to cover today is the definitions of working relationship document. So this document essentially is just a disclosure document, right? And it just is to help you understand the different brokerage relationships that are available to you. So those three different brokerage relationships in Colorado are seller agency, buyer's agency, and transaction broker, right? So as a seller's agent, we as brokers work solely on behalf of the seller to promote the interests of the seller, right? We have a fiduciary duty, right? We need to act with utmost good faith, loyalty, and fidelity. When people talk about what an agency relationship incurs, it's just that. We as your brokers have to act in your best interest. We negotiate on behalf of and act as your advocate as the seller. Brokers are also advocates in addition to agents. We're required to disclose adverse material facts. So if I walk into the property that I'm selling and I see that there is a massive roof leak, just because I owe you agency as the seller, just because I have to act with utmost good faith, loyalty, and fidelity, does not mean that I can hide adverse material facts that I know about. So if the roof caves in, if there was a fire, God forbid, if there are any sort of adverse material facts, is how it's defined inside the real estate contracts, then I do have a duty to disclose that as an agent. So some agents don't, and that's on them, but just know that if you're a buyer interacting with a seller's agent, I am, or that agent is, that broker, that realtor is bound by the contract to tell you about things that you should know about that are referred to as adverse material facts. Now, if I don't know about it, or if I couldn't reasonably know about it, I'm not able to disclose it, but just know that I am technically um, under a duty to disclose for major things, adverse material facts. Okay, buyer's agency. So the opposite of seller's agency, just in the sense that um, if I'm a buyer's agent, I'm representing the broker. So in the same way that I work with the seller on their behalf to promote their interests with the utmost good faith, loyalty, and fidelity, if I'm a buyer's agent, I do that same thing, but for the buyer. I act as an advocate for the buyer. I must disclose all adverse material facts. So that could be, um, it's when you're selling, it's that could be limited to a roof, that could be limited to systems. When you're buying, adverse material facts could even include the buyer's financial ability to perform in terms of the transaction. So if the buyer comes to me and says, I just got fired, you know, and I'm like trying to get a new job, but I don't think I'm going to be able to get financing. As the buyer's agent, I actually have a duty to disclose that inside of the transaction. Um, if the buyer intends to occupy the property, I need to disclose that. Um, there's a separate written buyer agency agreement, just like there's a separate written listing agreement for sellers. We're going to go over the seller's agreement today. We're going to cover the buyer's exclusive right to buy contract in another lesson. But today, we're just going to mostly focus on the listing side of things. Okay, and then the third way that we can all work together as a team is as a transaction broker, right? And so a transaction broker is essentially occupying the middle space inside of a transaction. So if I'm a seller's agent, I have to, I have an agency relationship with the seller. I have to treat the buyer as a customer, okay? The definition of customer is at the bottom there. The customer is a party to a real estate transaction with whom the broker has no brokerage relationship because we haven't engaged or employed the broker, either as an agent or as a transaction broker. So in a normal deal, we're going to have a seller's agent, we're going to have a buyer's agent, and the seller's agent is going to treat the buyer as a customer. The buyer's agent is going to treat the seller as a customer. To just say, like, we don't have a brokerage relationship, I don't owe you utmost good faith, loyalty, and fidelity. You're here, I'm engaging with you, but we don't have any sort of contractual relationship, and I don't owe you anything from an agency standpoint. That's what your agent is for. That's what your broker is for. Now, if you're a transaction broker, let's say you have a listing and you're marketing the heck out of it, and you find a buyer for that listing. Now, Colorado does not allow dual agency, so you can't be both a buyer's and a seller's agent. And that extends to explicit relationships, but it also extends to less explicit relationships. So if my mother is selling a property and I don't have any ownership in the property, and I find a buyer, I actually am sort of walking the line about whether I can be a transaction broker. Because, the question is, can I treat my mother like a customer? Can I treat my mother as if I don't owe her the utmost good faith, loyalty, and fidelity? And most people would say, hey, if you're selling a house for your mom and you're representing both sides in the transaction, it's going to be really difficult for you to do that because you love your mom and you want what's best for her and you don't really know the buyer. And so even if you're trying as hard as you can to remain neutral, if the real estate commission put you in front of them and said, okay, so you didn't treat your mother with more care, with more good faith, loyalty, and fidelity than someone you don't know, it's just not so believable. So just be aware of that if you're a broker. Also be aware of that if you're a customer. If someone is saying, oh, I'm selling this house for my mom, I can be a transaction broker. That's a strange relationship, and I actually, if I was advising you, would not be comfortable with you accepting a transaction broker relationship with someone who has sort of an implicit bias in sort of the transaction. Like they're probably going to negotiate harder for their mother than they are for you, right? Facts. Anyway, the transaction broker, they just assist everybody inside the transaction, right? They have to use reasonable skill and care. They still have to do a good job with the paperwork. They still have to disclose adverse material facts. There are certain things that transaction broker has to do, but the transaction broker does not have an agency relationship with either party, right? So you have to be careful. If you have a transaction broker, it's not as if you have someone that's acting on your good faith. They may just be there sort of to kind of help with the paperwork, but actually they don't have an agency relationship with anybody when they're a transaction broker. So when you're going to discuss financing, when you're going to look at houses, when you're going to do most things with a broker, as soon as really the rubber meets the road, as they say, you should be receiving a definition of working relationship, because this is the document that you need to receive as a client for the real estate commission to just feel happy about things. So you should be seeing this kind of first. And then if you were going to go list your property, which you might sign, which you probably should sign, is going to be an exclusive right to sell listing contract. This is the contract that sellers sign with their listing broker or with their selling broker. If you're a buyer, you're going to sign a different document, which we'll cover at another time, not on this video. So first, should just say that this is a binding contract. That's the first thing that all the contracts say. It does have important legal consequences, and you should always seek legal counsel before signing if you're worried or have questions, or if your broker can't answer. Brokers are lawyers in fact in Colorado, which just means that the Department of Real Estate has defined some key transaction documents that we cannot change and that we must use if we didn't have an attorney to create a purchase and sale agreement or some of our other documents. So they refer to us as lawyers in fact, which just means that we have legal documents that we can fill out and are trained to fill out, but we are not lawyers in full. So you should always retain real estate legal counsel, especially if you're doing something that's non-standard. Plenty of people get through a transaction without a lawyer, but you should always be aware that if you have questions, if you want an independent review of something, real estate agents are great, but they are not trained attorneys. They did not go to law school. So the more tedious or difficult stuff to understand, a lawyer is probably a good move in that way. Okay, so we talked about seller agency, transaction brokerage. Generally, we're going to be seller's agency first, unless we already have a buyer for a property like this. We always have the date. It's always good to check and reference the date there. Depending on whether your broker is at a multiple person firm or a single person firm, we'll select multiple or single here. Defined terms are just about the property, about the broker, the brokerage, and the seller. In this case, we have a LLC that we're selling through. So you would have the seller would be an LLC, and then we'd have a signatory, which is the person who signs for the LLC. Important to check that the property legal description is correct. You can pull that from the county assessor's website, and then also that the address is also correct. If these documents are not correct, we have to do paperwork later. Amend, extend contracts is what they're referred to in Colorado. So we like to, as best we can, not have to fix things for minor paperwork issues. We want to just double check, triple, quadruple check everything the first time, and then we know that it's good, and we don't have to have title tell us later that, hey, you misspelled this person's name, hey, you missed a dash in the legal description. It's always good just on the front end to be really careful. If you're in an affordable housing property, 3.5 is where we check that it is part of affordable housing program. You have to gather data on that if you want. 3.6 is just talking about the sale or the lease of the property. So obviously, we're here because we like each other, but we're also here because we need to transact on real estate. So section 3.6 is really important because it talks about the listing period. That is, what is the term of this contract? It's pretty common to see 6-month terms on larger projects where the broker may spend money on photos, on staging potentially, depending on what the agreement is. They may spend photos on marketing. They need to be assured that they have enough time to recoup those costs and to have a good chance to sell the property. If I'm selling a $2 million property and I sign a 2-month listing agreement, it's likely that I won't have sold that property in 2 months, and that kind of exposes me. So a kind of a standard listing term period, I like to do 6 months or through to the end of the year. whichever just seems to be a better fit. This one is from September 15th through the end of the year. That's appropriate for me, and I think we'll get it done in that time. But just know that you can very easily come up on the end of this. If you aren't sure about your agent, you may want to shorten this up so that you can get out if you need to. If you think that you as a broker are going to need more time, you want to fight for as much time inside of the listing period. But just understand that that is the term of the contract. Okay, computations of date and deadlines. This is a really important section. For all my contracts, I always make sure that this is checked as will. This just means that if a date or a deadline in the contract, let's say that the listing period ends on a Sunday, it just means that any of those days, Saturday, Sunday, federal or Colorado state holiday, will be extended to the next business day. This is just always helpful if we're not picking hard deadlines for the contract, if we're picking mutual execution contract dates, and it just is it's a good cover your ass in case closing falls on a Sunday. Well, title's not open on Sunday. So if you haven't extended the dates and deadlines, you can sort of be in default unintentionally. So 3.9.2, it's really good to click will inside of this box at all times. Section 4 talks about brokerage relationships. So when we're back in the definitions and working relationships, like this is our brokerage relationships here. Now we're into the contract where we're deciding what that relationship is going to be, right? If you're a listing agent, it's probably going to be seller agency only. If you're open to your broker being a transaction broker, and that would be if they have really good channels to source buyers, if they already have buyers that they had in mind, and if you're comfortable with them as a transaction broker after you've read and understood what a transaction broker is from the definitions of working relationships, it may make a lot of sense to leave this box unchecked. It may save you some money, just depending on your negotiation with the broker, and it may make things easier to kind of have your broker control both sides of the deal. But totally up to you. If you have questions about that, or if it's not fully understood what is what, I'm gonna put my number up here. Feel free to text me. Hey John, I saw your video on exclusive right to sell listing contracts. I still don't really get what a transaction broker is. In what way would a transaction broker ever be helpful to me? I'd love to talk through it. So just shoot me a text. All right, continuing on. This section is one of my favorite sections to review with people because we talk about what a broker is, we talk about what an agent is, but what does an agent do? What does an agent owe me? Section 5 of this contract, the brokerage duties section, is a great section to look at. If you had to look at any part of this contract, I'd say that this is one of the most important parts because it helps you understand what my broker does. Does my broker owe me this in this situation? Does the broker have a duty, a contractual duty to fulfill these certain terms? Well, Section 5 and then Section 6, additional duties of a seller's agent will tell you that depending on your relationship with them. So, right, just at a high overview, we must exercise reasonable skill and care. We must perform the terms of any written or oral agreement with the seller. We must present all offers from the seller in a timely manner, regardless of whether the project is subject to sale. If you're already under contract and you get an offer, you can't just not let the seller see that. You need to forward that immediately. And on and on and on. We're going to cover in another video explicitly what all these things are, what they mean, and what specific examples they would come up inside of a real transaction. So just, be on the lookout because this is a really interesting one for me. I think every broker and client should 100% understand what everyone is agreeing to in the contract, and it's all very explicitly put here. So we'll cover that in detail later. Otherwise, I've been pausing here for a little bit, so I'm sure you can read it. Go ahead, pause the YouTube, check it out. There are some interesting things, and we actually do owe clients a lot. And when people say, "What do brokers do?" What are they? They're charging me, but what am I actually providing from a value standpoint? A lot of that's covered here, in addition to some other sections. All right. We do a job. Brokers are a service-based business. When we provide a service, we're compensated. That's how we pay our bills. That's how we buy real estate on our own. Is through doing this. And so Section 7 just talks about compensation to the brokerage firm and the cooperating broker. So when we list a property, we, as the listing agent, agree to be paid a certain commission or gross dollar amount. Either can be put in the contract. And we also agree what we're going to market the property as. So the co-op broker, the broker that's coming in and interacting with us on a transaction, we make it very clear what they'll be paid up front. RE Colorado is our MLS. It's publicly listed, and you earn that commission based on that public listing. So just to say, like, you need to know what you'll be paid as a buyer's agent before you make an offer. And so all that information is public and available on the MLS for other brokers. Anyway, that's all decided here. If you're going to sell a property and you're also going to have your broker try and lease the property, you can say here whether there's a lease commission. If we're trying to sell a property, I don't recommend you also try and rent it. But if you did want to keep that as an option, you can talk about compensation and agree to lease compensation inside of this section. 7.2.3 is a holdover period. This is just important for brokers to say, if I show a buyer on the last day of my listing and they buy 2 days after my listing expires, well, I brought that buyer here. I'm owed money. So the holdover period just saying is, if you have leads, if you bring someone into the property and they buy within the holdover period, then you're just owed your commission because you did earn it. And to be clear, guys, I'm not going to cover like every single nook and cranny of this contract. I'm just going to cover the stuff that I think is relatively important. If you're a client of mine and you come, we can read every single word of this contract. If you want, it's your right to do so. I do recommend it. But if I skip over something and you think it's important, hey, let me know in the comments below. Maybe I need to refilm this video because I missed something special. And I'm human, and I love doing this. I love educating you all. But I'm still human. I'm still imperfect. So if I miss something and you're mad about it, just let me know. Heck, put it in the comments. Okay. Limitation on third-party compensation. This is just saying, we as brokers are not allowed to mark things up. If we help you with a third party, if we're giving you contacts, if we're connecting you, we're not going to bump the price of the remodel by 10%. It's just, it's not allowed unless there's written consent. So it all just has to be sort of agreed upon. We can't just, don't worry, it's not legal for us to just mark things up. Other brokers' assistance. So this is just saying that we're going to mark it on the MLS and that other brokers may access. 9.1 talks about the MLS and how we access things. It also talks about how we can authorize other people to go into the listing. So if you don't want unlicensed brokers' assistance, you'll want to make sure that's clear here. Otherwise, I like to say everything here. I like to change the code on my lockbox often. I like to give people permission to access it if they have contractors, if they have inspectors. I think that's okay and it's easy to do. But we just need to make sure that we're controlling it, that we're changing the lockbox often, so that access is not just willy-nilly. We don't want to leave a code for 12 weeks because then 100 people may have that code, and it's going to be really hard to know who accessed your property unless you're changing the code often. For sure, change it when you go under contract, because it's just helpful to sort of like lock off that to now just the person who is seeing the property because you're under contract is the one that has the code. Okay, 9.3 is broker marketing. We're going to listen on marketing. We're going to perform these tasks. So it may be that we're posting on social media. We're taking unrelated photography for branding exercises. We may do a lot there. We just want to be kind of explicit about what we're doing. 9.4 just talks about marketing termination. Section 10 is the seller's obligations to brokers. So obviously, like, we owe you all, but also you owe us in a certain way, just to say that we are going to perform all negotiations and communications. It's going to go through us. that if you're going to advertise at all, that it's going to be approved by us, that you're not subject to an existing listing agreement, that we have your consent, that all materials supplied to broker are owned by the seller, so the seller can't give you, files that are owned by somebody else because you may then use them and get in trouble. So this is just saying that, that it's all above board and good. And then 10.5 just talks about the Colorado Foreclosure Protection Act, which you can read a little bit more. 11, super important, price and terms. What are we going to list it at? What are we going to accept in terms of the loan terms? Are we going to pay for discount points? Are we going to pay buyer's closing costs? What are we going to do with seller proceeds? All of that is described in section 11, price and terms, in addition to section 12, which just talks about earnest money deposit, which is important to think about. Inclusions and exclusions. Inclusions are things that we include in the sale. Exclusions are things that we exclude from the sale. So if you have a really nice fridge that you're never going to be able to find again, you don't want to sell it with the property, but it's going to be there until the property is sold, you would want that fridge to be included in the exclusions. If you have a couch that you really would like the new people to have, it's just not going to work in your new house, you could have the couch be included in inclusions. But just know inclusions means included in the sale, exclusions means excluded in the sale. We want to be really careful that we list everything that you really want to keep or don't want to keep. And then, not attached inclusions, which are always included with the sale, are kind of defined here, including other inclusions. Things that don't make it into the contract that need to make it into the contract could be appliances. If we don't include the appliances in the inclusions, it could be that they swap appliances with cheaper appliances at the end, or they take the appliances out. Appliances do need to be included in our inclusions just to cover ourselves, but things like drapery rods don't need to be necessarily included in the inclusions, right? Encumbered inclusions, that's just things that you lease. Encumbrance would be like you have a loan on it. If there are any lease documents currently, trade fixtures, these things don't apply to most single-family homes. If you have a parking space, that's kind of talked about here in the parking space and storage section. If you have water rights, that's talked about here. If you have growing crops, one of my favorite facts is that if I'm growing corn on my property and I sell the property, I can actually retain the rights to harvest that corn. I would talk about that in section 13.6, right? Crops are kind of a funny thing. If you plant it and you owned it, you can actually have the rights to the spoils, the corn at the end of that harvest. How are we going to convey the property? Special warranty versus general versus these other ones. Special warranty and general are the most common. Special warranty is probably what I'm going to advise you to do. This is just saying you're warranting the deed for the time that you owned it. General warranty says we're going to warranty it for the entire time it's existed. If it's a 200-year-old property, you probably don't want to warranty the title for that entire time. You probably just want to warranty it for the 3 years that you lived there. On and on, association assessments just talks about, is there a monthly assessment, a yearly assessment? How are we going to deliver possession, keys at closing? Is there a post-close occupancy agreement? What are the obligations of both the buyer and seller to disclose material facts? How do we deal with default? Section 19, how do we forfeit earnest money if a buyer comes in and doesn't perform and has to forfeit their earnest money? Who retains that earnest money? Cost of services, non-discrimination, of course, will never discriminate against anyone in a protected class, federally or on a state level. Legal and tax counsel that you should always get, legal and tax counsel if you need it, that if we have disputes that arise, that will go to mediation. And then additional provisions is where we would put additional things that have not been approved by the Real Estate Commission but may be important to the transaction. Yeah, and then we sign, and that's kind of it. So if you were curious about listing contracts, hopefully you are no longer curious about listing contracts. If you have questions, any question, if you are a buyer and seller and you've done transactions before and you never received these documents and you want to know why, hey, why don't you just text me? Just text me, y'all. If you're interested in talking about your property, if you're interested in talking about how Toprock Real Estate can help you. If you want to just know more about us, I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to talk to you. I do real estate all day, every day, and one of my great passions is just connecting with people and learning more about them and what they do and what's sort of important to them. So community is a central value at Toprock, and you, just because you're here watching our video, means you're part of our community. So thank you so much. I'm John Galloway. I'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, please like and subscribe to see more content. Yeah, and I'll see you again later. Bye.